Everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Marcell Vollmer, and we're going to talk about leading the way in decarbonisation of supply chains, which is a fascinating subject. It's something that I've been looking forward to. Marcell, you have such an amazing background. You worked at SAP, which most people would see as a high point in the career, but you've then gone on to the Boston Consulting Group, so BCG, and you are like all over social. You can just post a picture of anything and it gets loads of engagement. So the fact that I've actually got you on here, I'm actually really honoured to have you.
Likewise.
Before we get started, where can people find you?
So basically, the easiest way to reach out to me is via social media. You mentioned it, and thanks for the appreciation. And I highly appreciate also the engagement and interaction with great influencers like you. And I learned a lot when I started. Best is LinkedIn, Marcell Vollmer, as my name goes, and on Twitter @mvollmer1. This is my Twitter handle. So feel free to connect with me, and I definitely respond to my messages.
So you've got, I'm just looking at the bio that you sent over. You're currently partner and director of BCG. You've got 20 years experience of developing and implementing procurement, supply chain, finance, shared services, digital transformation. I mean, you have just got a track record to die for. As I said, you worked at SAP, where you were chief procurement officer. You were senior vice president there. You've also had various roles of PA consulting. I mean, you are the speaker to die for to talk about supply chain. So
thanks, Tim. I really appreciate your feedback. And
why don't you give us your view of your journey, just briefly, in terms of how you got to where you are today? Because actually talking about decarbonisation is quite a radical thing. And certainly when we had a conversation, when we do our prep session, I mean, you came out with some really fascinating stuff. So why don't you give your view on your journey to date?
Absolutely, thanks, and happy to do that. Basically, I got into supply chain very early. I worked 15 years for DHL. DHL is very well known in the meantime after the acquisition by Deutsche Post WorldNet. Being an express logistics business, that's where I started at until the integration projects were performed. And I moved on, and you mentioned PA consulting, a very short time before I joined SAP, and really got into shared services, transforming the back office functions of SAP. Moved on also to lead the large post-merger integrations SAP started with back in 2007, and Business Objects was the first one, and I was the overall integration lead for Sybase, mobile acquisition SAP decided to do, and supported a little bit the setup of the co-CEO office with 12 strategic initiatives before I got appointed as Chief Procurement Officer. And this was also the time when I really got into sustainability as a topic, where I learned a lot from my colleagues, the Chief Sustainability Officer. He was appointed pretty much at the same time when I got into the role. And we had a very close relationship because everything what SAP is buying, in the meantime, it's around 6 billion euro. Total revenue is 28 billion, just to give you a little bit of perspective on the SAP numbers. And everything what you are buying, basically, you can have impact. You can decide, do you want to buy it in a sustainable way, or also thinking about what might be an additional price you need to pay, because there is no free lunch in life, what we know. I worked more than 4 years. By the way, the longest period of time in my life I have worked in one position, because the role was so exciting, and the role got accompanied by also being part of the acquisition and post-merger integration of Ariba, Fieldglass, and Concur. 3 very large acquisitions SAP decided to do to become the market leader for source-to-pay solutions in the cloud.
Yes.
And after that, I moved on to the United States as Chief Operating Officer, integrating Ariba, Fieldglass, focusing on the procurement solution side. And After that, I was Chief Digital Officer, helping clients defining digital transformation. And not a big surprise, when I talked about procurement, which I did most of my time, sustainability also came up as one of the priorities. At Celonis, I was 1 year Chief Innovation Officer prior to now exactly 1 year I'm with BCG. Here I have seen also that companies looking in the end-to-end process side to really understanding where do they get everything from? How is this connected? So I think I got pretty much into this topic, and as a recent survey confirms, it is not a priority right now for companies when you look what they are really doing. But when you look and ask the chief procurement officers, what is your priority in the next years? Besides savings, what needs to get delivered in procurement? Not a big surprise, it's all about cost, of course, what procurement does, but it's much more. And on the strategic initiatives, sustainability is the number one priority, which we see now from a recent survey with ISM and the University of Mannheim. So I hope it was not too long to give a little bit an overview and link it also to the topic we want to discuss today.
So one of the things that you said to me during the prep was that global trade is something like 18 trillion. I'm guessing
Correct.
That's dollars.
Yes.
That's an awful lot of money. That's in terms of goods being bought and sold, and that I'm trying to put that into context in terms of if all of those things have to be moved. I mean, not everything has to be moved, I guess, because you may be buying a service. But if those things have to be moved, that has a massive impact in terms of supply chain.
Absolutely, Tim. And just to bring it in a perspective, the 18 trillion, the global GDP is about 85 trillion. So you see a significant portion out of that is what global trade stands for, and the 18 trillion is about. And you are right, there's also services. But basically, when we talk about global trade, it is not about the services. It is really about what gets moved from A to B, from Asia to Europe, from Asia to the United States, but also within the different regions in the world. And this volume, by the way, despite everything what we see right now due to the COVID-19 pandemic, is supposed to increase by 1 trillion, so up to 19 trillion by 2023. That's the latest forecast what we see. So the supply chain volume and the global trade is even increasing, which means we need now to focus also how to make it in a more sustainable way if we want to create impact and define this as a priority, what companies do, what also the government is doing by seeing the United States rejoining the Paris Agreement. We see lots of EU regulations coming up here within the European regions, and also Asia. China is doing a lot, and the different countries around the world. So it's definitely a priority, and it impacts the end-to-end supply chain we run to keep everything going and also get the different goods, what we consume around the globe.
So one of the things that you talked about was the fact that global supply chains are being regionalized. And you also talk about how there's a number of things that are being impacted. So Brexit for one, different trade agreements being drawn up. So Brexit is. So I live in the UK, so it's we're now negotiating with people like Japan and Australia, and that's obviously going to have an impact. You've got this ongoing. Can we call it a trade war between US and China? There's certainly a certain amount of tension between the two countries. And COVID has changed certainly the way that supply chains work, because maybe what happened was you got your raw materials from South Korea, and all of a sudden that factory is shut because of COVID. So you've got to get them from somewhere else. So there's this massive change going on with the supply chain. Give us your view.
So, Tim, you are exactly right. What we see due to the COVID-19 pandemic is that companies looking not only into the global supply chain, which was definitely a number one priority, just to look at the price. This is changing due to two reasons, by the way. One reason is that we see also certain risk what companies consider by looking into their supply base. So how to de-risk the supply base. When I got appointed as Chief Procurement Officer at SAP back in 2011, I got confronted right away after I got appointed with two major crises. Probably most of you remember it is, number one was Fukushima. We have seen and learned a lot about how globally connected we are. And I was at a procurement conference, just to give a little bit of practical example also. And I met a lot of CPOs. I was new in my role. I had a lot of conversation with the experienced CPOs to learn and also get their perspective. And lots of conversations at this point in time were, hey, yeah, horrible what happened, but fortunately we are not impacted because we are not doing business with this region within Japan, Fukushima. And I was looking also and asked my team, hey, do we have suppliers in that region? How do we get impacted? What does it mean? And we figured out very soon, oh, wow, it's not the tier one suppliers. By the way, SAP hasn't had any suppliers in that region at this point in time. But basically, I also asked the question about, is it that there are some interdependencies between the tier one suppliers we are doing business? Probably they get stuff from that region. We even don't know because we are not having any suppliers there. And I learned a lot in this time. And basically also the same appeared then when I was at another conference and met some of the CPOs I previously met again. And they told me also, oh, wow, we need to look a little bit more in tier one, tier two, tier three suppliers to really understand our end-to-end supply chain. Not all were the same. Some were very good already in getting analytics and the big data to use the information. Others were not so good. And I think this was an eye-opening event. The same, by the way, for the flood in Thailand. I will not go and eat up too much time by explaining this in detail, but we learned that the hard disk, basically 60-70% of the global hard disk production is done in Thailand, and the flood impacted this heavily at this point in time. But coming to the second aspect I want to share with you, and this is sustainability. Does it really make sense to only look at the price? And I give you one very practical example. Probably you have seen it because I posted it on social media and it really went up with very high engagement.
I remember, yes.
And likes.
Please explain, yeah.
Yes, the one I like very much is the pears, which got harvested in Argentina.
Yeah.
Get shipped to Thailand.
Yeah.
To do the packaging and sent back to the United States and some other regions in the world. Think about that. You get something from Argentina, you send it to Asia, to Thailand for the packaging, and then you send it back to the United States to sell it to the consumers or the wholesalers and then the consumers. This doesn't make sense. No. The same is done in Europe with the shrimps, what we get from the North Sea. They're getting processed out of Morocco. And when you look in things like that, this is possible to do, and these are not stupid decisions when you just look on the financial matrix. Pretty sure, because no one would do that if there was a very high price tag. And obviously, if you only look at the price, at the labor cost, including the shipping, this seems to be cheap. If you include also the sustainability impact, the CO2 emissions, for example, what it takes to really ship it half around the world, it doesn't make sense anymore. And as we are now seeing that the CO2 footprint is getting a price, you need to pay for the emissions. Europe is already doing that, and other states are considering the same. Basically, your entire calculation will change, and things like that will no longer happen on a global supply chain. We see a lot of regionalization, which definitely impacts and has also a change what we see right now in the market.
So what is it that organizations can start doing to try and actually strip out carbon from the supply chain and look at them? So we know that there's these global impacts, but we all have a responsibility, don't we, to actually try and reduce our carbon footprint?
Yeah, I think basically I say there are 5 steps. What is needed to do?
Okay.
You need to define the footprint and also really understand what are the ESG, environmental, social, and government regulations, what you have. A second one is you need to determine the materiality of individual ESG factors for your production, for your manufacturing and supply chain processes. After that, the third element I would see is establish a governance structure. You need to think about how do you want to do the ESG steering, what you need to do. Another one is then the fourth one is identify and define the controls to manage ESG for your company, for your organization. And finally, the last one, number 5, is introduce the right KPIs for your organization to change the behavior and ensure that the ESG steering will work on your company level, and share this with the outside community that your suppliers know, wow, you're tracking that. And basically, you're looking exactly in this also for your buying decisions, what you do for the procurement, for the purchasing process, what you run for your company.
Yeah. And I think that's really important that you externalize it, because one of the things is that we sit in our own little bubbles inside our companies and think this isn't important, but it's so important to externalize it. Not, my view is that we externalize it and tell the world we want to do this. And if we're telling our suppliers to do it, then they know that somebody's leading by example.
Yeah, and it's also, Tim, just if I may add this, it is also that there is pressure from different sides. I always say you need to have a 360 look into sustainability. It is also investors. We didn't mention investors as one group looking into that. BlackRock was giving a very clear statement as a CEO that sustainability is now part of the investment decisions, what BlackRock wants to do as the largest investing company in the world. On the other side, and I believe this is definitely even more important, is the customer perspective. If customers are not buying your products, and the example what I mentioned with the peers from Argentina packaged in Thailand, if you read this, and probably not a lot of people do that, but if people now looking more, hey, what is it really what I consume? Where does it come from? And focus on sustainability. The same for clothing, for the different goods, what they are buying. The customer definitely plays a key role. But there's definitely more. You need also to watch closely about the competitors. What are your competitors doing? If they start already the initiatives and put this on the top of the agenda of their priorities and communicate this to the external side, what we just discussed, this is a competitive advantage you might have or not have, depending on how you react on that. On the other side, the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, are putting a lot of pressure out there on us. Fridays for Future is one example, but there are much more right now. And by that also, the last one I want to mention is the regulation authority. So basically the government is now on top of the agenda. I'm German, as you can hear from my strong accent. I live in Frankfurt, Germany, and we have an upcoming election in 24 days from now. So basically, all parties have it as one of the top priorities defined, focusing on sustainability, and that's very important. What we see, where we really need to take a 360-degree perspective on this topic.
Yeah, there's even in political parties in here in the UK, there's a kind of a war about who can be the most green. And that's partly because obviously there's the Green Party. You have a very strong Green Party in Germany as well. But, there's a recognition that actually being sustainability and being green actually gets you votes. What about technology? Do you see technology like things like 5G having an impact in terms of how we can strip out carbon from the supply chain?
Yes, definitely. Technology plays a key role in that. Number one is 5G is a great example on that. I would add Internet of Things, connected devices, that you really have an end-to-end transparency about your supply chain. Probably RFID, the chips that you can track really, where are your shipments, You can, with GPS position, by the way, every single step of your supply chain. You might experience also something, oh wow, it got stuck, like the ships, the Evergreen in the Suez Canal, which might happening. So you need technology to stay on top of your end-to-end supply chain to really know where are your goods right now, when do you get it, and also is it in time or are there mitigations needed? Coming back to the regional supply chain, you might consider, by seeing what's happening by COVID when China got a lockdown and basically you couldn't get any production material anymore on the chips in China because there was a lockdown. The same was in the Suez Canal. Even if you have it on your chip, it doesn't help you if it does not go through the bottleneck connecting Asia with
It's
Europe.
great that you can see it, that it's stuck in the Suez Canal, but it's not going to help you.
Yeah, exactly. And therefore, but having early access to information, and this is where technology helps you, like 5G, GPS, the connected devices, just as one example, you can react early. It might be too late, but I was very impressed. I had a conversation with a CPO from a large conglomerate in Europe, and basically he told me it took us 3 hours to basically know exactly which containers are on the Evergreen, what is in there, and what is the impact also what we have to have or have not a mitigation strategy in place. Fortunately, it worked out well, but technology helps you with that. Think one step further. When you wanna really prove that, hey, my products are sustainable, how can you claim that? In the meantime, it's really tough to differentiate and take palm oil as one example, which is very prominent in the press discussed. You can't differentiate between a sustainable and a non-sustainable palm oil. What you can do, and where, for example, technologies like blockchain, or I like more saying digital ledger technology, which is a better term for that you can exactly prove, hey, I know the farmers and exactly the location where I get my palm oil from. And I have a certificate, here it is, this is how it got transported, and basically this is why I say my products are sustainable. This is coming back to the consumer, looking exactly into the ingredients and also the origination of the products they want to consume. This is key, and only technology can deliver that. But there's much more what we will see. Autonomous ships, for example, or autonomous vehicles will help us also to be more efficient. If you can operate certain machines 24/7, you might have another utilization which you can use. Digital twins can help you really to assess and understand how does your machine look like? When do I need maintenance? Can I already predict certain maintenance or information which help me to better run my operations? Robots might help you that we don't need to do the heavy lifting anymore as humans. Machines can do this much better. Artificial intelligence, machine learning can help us learn and go to the next level, really processing the information we as a human being might not be even able to fully capture what is behind. So therefore, I'm a very strong believer on digital technology. Sometimes I know people might fear losing the job. On the other side, we are now close to 8 billion people on Earth. When I was born in the 70s, 1970, now you know how old I am, basically we were less than half of this number people on Earth. Look, now we doubled the number of population. We have leapfrogged technology, robots, artificial intelligence, all what I mentioned. I don't want to repeat the buzzwords, but basically we have the lowest unemployment rate globally. We have the best health situation compared to the past. It's not perfect. I'm not saying that. And there will be disruptions and changes. But basically, we see technology can also have a positive impact and help us to prepare for the future. And the supply chain is definitely the key element connecting the origination until the consumer is buying and consuming the product.
Marcell, thank you so much. The 20 minutes goes so quickly. It's been so insightful. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise. I mean, I think this is a fascinating subject. And something that we're probably just starting. And I agree with you. Some of these technologies are just, actually, they've been around a long time, but we're still very, very new with them. And I think this is a really exciting subject. And thank you for coming on and sharing that with me.
You're well welcome. Highly appreciate, and I hope it was insightful.
Oh, it's been fantastic. Thank you. And it's one of these things where we probably need to talk again in a year or something like that, because I'm sure things will change. The way that things are changing so fast because of COVID and stuff, that it things just seem to be accelerating faster and faster. And the way that we're having to relook at and accept and use the technologies you talked about, IoT, QR codes, for example. QR codes were, everyone just used to laugh about QR codes. You can't move for QR codes now. Everything is, do you have your vaccination certificate? It's a QR code. Do you have QR code for this and QR code for that? It's amazing how things have suddenly been absorbed by technology. Thank you, Marcell.
I couldn't agree more. You're well welcome. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you so much. And I'll see you on social.
Definitely. You will. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks.